Manuel Valls yesterday in Parliament. Plenty of focus, of course, on the economy.
Indeed, and in fact, a break from the austerity that we've been talking so much about in recent budget speeches here in France. In Manuel Valls' speech, there was a tax cut for low-income workers, those earning just above the minimum wage. We'll see their social charges reduced. For businesses, though, much more to celebrate, a whole range of tax cuts for them. The reductions are part of the government's plan to bring down the record unemployment here in France, but there was no insistence by the Prime Minister of how many jobs companies would have to create in return. So will these measures go far enough to create jobs? Yuka Royer has been finding out.
As expected, plans to revamp France's economy dominated Manuel Valls' 47-minute speech in Parliament. The new Prime Minister said the government must, quote, open a new chapter.
Supporting private companies means supporting jobs, investments and exports. So yes, we will act to encourage companies.
Valls details the government's plan to slash the country's notoriously high labour costs by €30 billion through cuts on payroll charges, as well as reducing the corporate tax to 28% by 2020. The aim? To boost French firms' competitiveness by making it easier to hire people and make investments. Among the measures, dropping employer costs to zero for minimum wage workers. Small business owners are not overly convinced.
It's just a drop in the ocean considering the whole staff base. Payroll charges are very, very high in France.
By reducing costs, we may become more competitive on the market and see increased orders. Then we'll need more people. But until we actually start receiving more orders, we can't start hiring.
While promising to ease employers' burdens, the Prime Minister did not make any proposals for making France's labour market more flexible, something that the EU and the OECD have been calling for.
Well, looking at what that will mean, Stephen, all the measures announced yesterday will, of course, cost money that the French government does not have.
No, it certainly doesn't. And in fact, the measures announced by Manuel Valls, on top of those that we had already been expecting, add up to another €11 billion the government will have to find. That on top of €50 billion in public spending cuts that the Prime Minister is going to have to make decisions on very soon. These are the indications he gave in his speech. €19 billion will go from the budget for public sector staff, 10 billion from healthcare and 10 billion from local government. That leaves another 11 billion of that amount to be found. And of course, this all the while France needs to reduce its budget deficit below that 3% limit. Manuel Valls hasn't yet committed to whether or not France will be able to do that by 2015. That's what the EU says it has to do.
He was pretty ambiguous about it in yesterday's speech.
Indeed, it was skirted around the issue, and that's what he's been saying on French radio or French television this morning. He's been saying that they will discuss the pace of those reforms in the coming days. He said they've already started discussing this with the European authorities. We should get an answer on that in the coming days, how fast they're going to do it and if they're going to reach that target, which is really important in the European scheme of things.
Now we're going to move on, Stephen, to the motor industry and another recall of cars by Toyota.
Yeah, the Japanese car maker says it's recalling almost 6.4 million vehicles, one of the biggest recalls in its history. Toyota says 27 models are affected by a range of problems, including issues with steering columns and an engine starter glitch. This coming just a month after the firm was fined $1.2 billion by US authorities for criminal charges that it tried to cover up an accelerator fault that led to at least 5 deaths in the US.
Well, how's that latest news affected shares?
Their shares actually closed down over 3.4% in Tokyo today, fitting in with the trend, in fact, on the Nikkei, which closed down over 2% in trading today. The strong yen hurting exporters there. A slightly more positive picture across the rest of the Asian markets. Here in Europe, it's been a positive start to the day in the most part, fairly light gains, though, this after the falls that we saw yesterday.
Now we're going to take a look at the day's company news with more bad news for General Motors.
Yeah, that's right. More bad news in the motor industry. The US Road Safety Authority says it's imposing a fine of $7,000 per day on GM over its failure to provide it with certain documents. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration wants information on how the ignition switch fault that's thought to have caused at least 13 deaths. It says the car maker has already run up a fine of $28,000 for missing the April 3rd deadline. And Olympus says it's being sued by 6 banks for more than $270 million over an accounting scandal at the firm. The lenders want compensation over false financial statements filed over a period of 11 years. The controversy made public in 2011 by the company's former chief executive, Michael Woodford.
There, a look at the latest business headlines. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for all that. Florence is back here for a look this time at what's making headlines in the international